we're going to pick up in Ruth here. Let me get to the right slide. So we've been trekking through Ruth. We're in Ruth chapter 3, Ruth chapter 3 of 4. And I'm going to give us some context before we get going, or a recap before we get going. There are those maroon Bibles on the tables, and if you need one, that's yours. That's our gift to you. Because what we're going to be doing as we go through Ruth is we're going to be really just reading the text, because it's a story. The book of Ruth is a story. It's a narrative. It's been known as by some to be the most beautiful short story ever written. And so we've wanted to read it that way. We wanted to read it as a compelling love story. And so because of that, we read through it as we would a story. And so let me just provide some recap of where we've been. So Ruth chapter 1 and 2, we're following the story of Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. And way back at the beginning in Ruth chapter 1, Naomi and her family, which she had a husband, Elimelech, and her 2 sons, they're living in Bethlehem during the period of the Judges. Now, the period of the Judges was known as a time where everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And so not only was that the cultural landscape, but on top of that, there was also a famine. And so what this family decides to do, Naomi, Elimelech, and their kids, is they leave Bethlehem, leave the promised land in hope of a better future. So they leave Bethlehem and they go to Moab. Moab is this pagan nation, this nation that is outside of the people of God. And so while they're there, her sons married 2 Moabite women, and then tragedy begins to strike. So her husband dies, and after her husband dies, her 2 sons die as well, and she is left widowed and with 2 Moabite daughters-in-law in a foreign land. And she's in a tough spot. Her story is known as the female Job, if you're familiar with Job's story. And so for a woman in this era, really, she has lost everything. A woman in this era has lost everything, including hope for the future. And so we've talked about how this is something we've really liked about Ruth, is that unlike any other book in the Bible, it provides a woman's perspective on certain situations in life. And so, for example, if a man lost a wife, he would just go remarry and they'd have more kids, and there is his heritage. For a woman, she is now dependent on someone else to hopefully take her in so that she might have hope for the future. And so we get these little nuggets in Ruth where we see what it might be like to live as a woman in this culture. Now, Naomi, as they're there, Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law are living together when they hear that the famine is over back in Bethlehem. And so they decide to go back. And on their way back, Naomi turns to them and says, look, don't follow me. Go back to your mother and father. You will have a better future there. You'll be able to be provided for, live in your father's house. This is going to be better for you than to follow me, because my life is pretty bleak. And so one of her daughters, Orpah, says, okay, I'll head back. But her other, Ruth, says, no, I'm staying with you. And that's where we get the famous line where she says, for where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Okay, so Ruth says, no, I am with you. And so they arrive back to Bethlehem after 10 years of tragedy, and she leaves with a family. So if you remember, she leaves Bethlehem with a family and with hopes for the future, and she returns with what? Just a Moabite woman. And it's there that she says, I am bitter. She says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, because I am bitter. She says, the Almighty has stretched out his hand against me. And so we said it was there that we see Naomi's faith. Now, it's a bitter faith. It's a faith that has been really rolled through the mud a little bit, and it's a struggling faith, but it is a faith nonetheless. And it is this faith that draws this family back to Bethlehem. And it is there that they arrive with really 2 glaring needs. So we said Ruth and Naomi come back with 2 big needs. That is for food and for family. So they have the immediate need of just something to eat because they're poor and they're widows. They need something to care for them. So they have this need of food and then also this need of family. So if they hope to have any lasting hope, anything that would help them, that would provide for them with any longevity, they're going to need someone to take care of them. They're going to need someone to be their family. So they come back with those needs. And so what's interesting is they come back in God's sovereignty at the end of chapter 1 during barley harvest. That's the little nugget we get at the end of chapter 1 where it says, hey, here is the setting. Here is God beginning to set the stage. And so that's how chapter 1 ends. And then chapter 2 begins in the barley fields. And so this is during barley harvest where everyone is going and retrieving their crops. And that's where we meet Boaz, an essential character in this story, Boaz. And so we see Ruth in chapter 2 heading to the barley fields to glean. And to glean is to basically just try to pick up enough scraps off the ground so you have enough to eat. And so that was her intent. She goes out to glean. Now, it just so happens that she wanders into Boaz's field. And it is here that we see this love story begin to gain some traction as we see Boaz and Ruth meet. So Boaz approaches Ruth in his field. Boaz is a man of status. He's a man of wealth. He is an Israelite man. He is someone with power and influence. And there are many ways that he could have leveraged his power over Ruth. Many ways that he could have used who he was over this immigrant woman. But instead, it says that he approaches her and addresses her how? He says, listen, daughter. It's the first words out of his mouth. Listen, daughter. And so of all the ways he could have responded to Ruth, he greets her with gentleness, with love, with compassion. And so we talked about how incredible that is, considering what he could have done to her. And so he showers her with kindness. We said that this word is used, this Hebrew word hesed, love, is used here, which is a word that doesn't really have an English translation, but to a Hebrew reader would have been love and loyalty and kindness and compassion, and all of these good and glorious things wrapped up into one word, hesed. And it says that Boaz showed her this type of love, and which was just unheard of for an Israelite to do for a foreigner, much less an Israelite man to do for a foreign woman. And so Boaz does all these things. He says, let me provide for you, let me protect you, let me serve you. And this draws Ruth. It says she bows her head to the ground and says specifically, why have I found favor in your eyes, though I am a foreigner? Okay, and we see that he doesn't just show her generosity for today or that day, but he provides for her and her mother-in-law for the entirety of the barley harvest. So we see that every day she continues to reap more and more and more because he gives her all of this barley. Now, I think that it was there that we said this is probably the first time that Naomi and Ruth felt hope. Not first time, but the first time in a long time. 10 years of tragedy, and now they see this glimmer of hope. And that's kind of where chapter 2 closes, with this sweet scene of Naomi and Ruth living together, enjoying the beneficiary, or being the beneficiaries of Boaz's generosity. However, there was still this underlying tension that we talked about, because it was there that they have enough food for now while the harvest is going on. But what if Boaz changes his mind? Or what about after the harvest? What do we do then? Like, we still, that need hasn't been met. And just two ladies living together, that there's still not really a prospect of family, of a husband. And so you still have this tension at the end of chapter 2. But we're reminded of one important detail that we'll pick up more on today at the end of chapter 2, where Naomi says to Ruth, hey, Boaz is our redeemer, or at least he can be our redeemer. And redeemer, I'll save all the details, but was a requirement by God's law. Redeemers could restore things that people have lost, even like it said if someone's brother's wife is left widowed, it is this man's responsibility to redeem her. So essentially Naomi's like, hey, he can help. If he wants to, he can help. And so that's where we're left at the end of chapter 2. Any thoughts? But this is my recap. I keep thinking about this as like Netflix, like previously on Ruth. Just to give you the recap. Anything before we get going on chapter 3? Good. All right. Ruth chapter 3. So like I said, we'll start in verse 1 and we'll just gradually read together. And I want to bring up that what I want to do here, this is the climax of the story. And I want to do my best as we go through this to help us feel the tension and the emotions that a Hebrew reader would have felt. So I'm going to try to elaborate on things to say, hey, this may seem profound to us, but let me just show you what a Hebrew would have been feeling as they're hearing this story or reading this story. And so I'm going to be exposing some of those things. We're going to be looking at this risky love and bold faith that we see in Ruth. And then I want to just put before us a very captivating example of love that we get from the story or the interactions between Ruth and Boaz. So those are a few of the things we're going to hit on as we go through it. So Ruth chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" Okay, so just pause. So just remember that there is still tension in this story. There is still no family. There is still no hope for the future. So there's essentially no guarantee that they will be loved and cared for. It's just Ruth and Naomi living with one another. And so really what Naomi brings up here is, Ruth, my daughter, I want you to find rest. I want you to be provided for. I want you to be secure. I want it to be well with you. She says, I want you to have more than just food during this harvest. And it's the word rest here in this passage that indicates Naomi is saying, Ruth, I want you to have this security of being loved and cared for. She says, I want it to be well with you. So Naomi makes a bold proposal. Here we go, verse 2. Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. Threshing floor is just where the farmers would go and separate the crop from the chaff after harvest season. So she's saying, hey, go, that's where he'll be. It says, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. Okay, so let me just point out a few things here. So Naomi says, okay, Ruth, Boaz is our relative. He is a potential redeemer. I think we need to take a shot. I think we need to take our best chance here. And here is her plan. She says, go and wash and anoint yourself with oil. Okay? Now, there's a couple interpretations of what what Naomi was communicating here, both of which I think can be present and potentially both are present, I think. It could be that Naomi was saying, hey, go clean yourself up. Like, you want to be presentable to this man. So just go wash up, put on some good clothes. You want to smell nice. You don't want to smell like barley. So just clean yourself up. So there's this one aspect that's saying, hey, just go clean up. But I think that there's also another interpretation that's even more powerful. And this is the same language used in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 20, to describe David after the death of his son. David's son is sick, and David is anguishing over his son. It says that even his servants didn't feel like they could approach him because he was in such agony. And it says that he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't do anything. He was in anguish. And so when his son passes, though, we see this shift in David. After his son passes, he is fasting, he is praying, he is in agony, and then his son passes. And we see this, verse 20. It says that then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his clothes. And he went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. And so after fasting and anguishing, his son passes. And we see David get up, and it sounds very similar to what Naomi was telling Ruth to do. Get up, wash himself, anoint himself with oil, and change his clothes. It is believed that the imagery here is meant to demonstrate, and hear this, is meant to demonstrate the shift from despair to hope. The anguish is over, we must push forward. The dread and pain must give way to hope. And so in this way, we could see Naomi calling to Ruth, hey, go and anoint yourself with oil. Go wash and dress yourself for change. It's like Naomi saying, look, the tides could change tonight. Everything can change. Our hopelessness can turn. Prepare yourself. Prepare your heart. Let this despair give way to hope. She's saying, prepare. And as I prepared this, as I was studying this and as I was reading this, I felt that we couldn't just run right over this. We couldn't not point this compelling call on Ruth to us. Because I think some of us might need to recognize that we have been approaching the Lord with a closed heart for too long. You know, some of us might need to evaluate ourselves and ask ourselves, have we lost belief that God can renew hope within us? Have we lost the belief that God can change our heart and can renew our heart, renew our passion, and change our future? Now, I'm not saying like prosperity, that there is prosperity along the way, but what I think Ruth is being called to do is believe that there is hope in the Lord. Believe that there is hope in the future. And so I would just say, would we be willing to be open and eager and expectant that God can move in our heart? Would we be willing to prepare ourselves that God might move and restore in our heart? Any thoughts on that before we move? First of all, a word on this Bible study, it's very discussion based. So if at any point you got questions or thoughts, we're here to talk about it. So you'll hear me say those types of things, or we'll actually go through these questions. So any thoughts on that before we move on? Okay, so Naomi goes on. She says, go down to the threshing floor where you will find Boaz. Go down there, but don't let him see you. Wait until he gets done eating, and then just take note where he goes to sleep. So watch him from afar, stay in the bushes, don't let him see you, see where he lays down, take note of it. Then she gets bold. She says, go to him while he's asleep, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Yikes. So this is where a Hebrew reader would have blushed. Like, she is telling her to do what? There are probably 2020 American, what's it called whenever you have comparisons here? I won't get into them, but she's saying, look, go and do this. Uncover his feet, lay beside him when he wakes up. Just let him tell you what he wants to do. Now, I think that it seems risky and pretty provocative. However, I think it's believed that a sexual interpretation of this action would not be an accurate interpretation of what's going on here. Considering the character of Boaz, considering the character of Ruth, the character of Naomi here, the goal is not for Ruth to instigate a sexual opportunity. Okay, so we can find rest there. It is likely that Naomi was telling Ruth, uncover his feet so that the cool breeze would gently wake him up as he feels the cool breeze on his exposed legs. And she says, lay there and patiently wait for him to wake up. Now, why she doesn't say, like, just go tap him on the shoulder, I don't know. Like, that seems to be a more clear response. But anyways, he says, he will tell you what to do. Now, though Naomi didn't have sexual intent with this, it was an opportunity that could have certainly been exploited by a man of poor character, right? That's probably why Naomi said, hey, make sure you take note of where he lays down, because you do not want to do this to the wrong man. Okay, so she's saying, look, take note. This is something that can be dangerous if you're not careful. And so to a Hebrew reader, they would have, I think, just felt the cringiness of this request on this woman. Like, no, don't ask her to do that. That's like, why? Why would you do that? Why would she put herself out there like that? And I think surely this makes us uncomfortable. And so this is a bold proposal, a scary proposal, a risky proposal, a potentially dangerous and shameful proposal. But it is even bolder faith on Ruth's part, because Ruth's the one that has to put it into action. Radical trust. Look how she responds. Verse 5, she says, all that you say, I will do. All that you say, I will do. And so in the face of what she's being asked to do, she agrees. She agrees. And she says, if she said, I think what we see here is that she trusts the heart of Naomi enough. And for what she knows of Boaz, it is enough for her to say that it is worthy of my trust. These people are worthy of my trust. I will take the risk. She understands that if the tides are going to turn, if she's going to have hope, then she's going to have faith, right? And bold faith at that. And that leads to action. And this is a faith that steps into the unknown. This is a faith that is willing to take the risk, a faith that understands that hope follows trust. And so I want to discuss this. What can we learn from Ruth's risk-taking trust? You could say risk-taking faith, but just recognizing that there is risk involved. What comes to your mind in this?
I would say the comfortability with which I live my faith.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like a juxtaposition maybe to my own life, and that I don't seek opportunities to take any risks
Yeah.
with my faith or my life.
Mm-hmm.
You remind me of who I'm putting my trust in to take the risk.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning, am I doing it for personal selfishness? Am I doing it with a heart for God?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. A good point to draw out of this, because Ruth had to completely trust Boaz and Naomi in this. Like, essentially, she is the pawn in this, where she's putting herself out there and sacrificing. And so she's got to have her trust in someone else. What else?
Think about like the fact that the fear that would be involved.
Yeah.
And like, okay, there's risk, which means that there's a little bit of fear, but she had to love those people and ultimately like think about me, like love God more than the, give into the fear that I'm facing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a love versus fear scenario.
Yep.
Well, love and trust, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Following the Lord doesn't always fit into a box of for everyone in certain parameters. Or I mean, it's not going to be outside or like sinful, but yeah, that sometimes there's risk and fear, or it may not make sense, or
Yeah. That's what that came to my mind too, just in the fact that if we are going to walk by faith, that is by nature going to bring about risk in our life, in every sphere, whether it's with your family, with your career, um, everywhere. Like, if we're going to live by faith and we believe faith is supernatural and not of this world, then we are going to encounter risk. Anything else?
This kind of trust leads to action too.
Yeah, that's right.
It's effective.
Yeah, that's what I had reflected on well, is that trust shores up a risk-taking faith. Like when we're willing to trust the Lord, it gives us boldness. It gives us a willingness to take risks. Anything else? Scheming?
I'm kind of struggling here.
That's all right.
That's like, I won't go into the weeds, but I've kind of talked about my take on some of this stuff.
Sure.
I think some of the things that happened to her husband and the boys
Mm-hmm.
were part of them leaving the promised land, marrying one white women, so they're essentially breaking the law. So we
Mm-hmm.
kind of see some of the consequences of that.
Yeah.
And now fast forward, we have Ruth putting trust in Naomi.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that perhaps Ruth has some reason to not trust Naomi up to this point.
Sure.
But she does anyway.
What would you say are her validated reasons not to trust Naomi?
I would think, and I guess probably part of it is what would be Ruth's understanding of the law. I don't know.
Oh, sure.
But one of the things that Naomi does do is tell Ruth to go back to her people and to their gods.
Yep.
Which on paper is bad advice.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, Ruth, it's like that's one of the tests that is subtle for Ruth in here. Like Ruth passed that test. It's
Yeah.
like, no, I want your God.
Mm-hmm.
He's the real thing.
Yep.
So she clings to Naomi, and that's kind of like you think about Abraham and Lot, right? When Lot stopped clinging to Abraham, who's kind of the redeemer of that storyline.
Mm-hmm.
That's when things go south for him. But Ruth makes the opposite decision here.
Mm-hmm.
To stick with like the people of the promise.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I guess I don't have a great answer for this, but I'm thinking about how like great Ruth's trust really is, and maybe she recognizes she's gambling more than she realizes.
Sure. It could be. I think that is, if you think critically about it, like, I mean, no way Naomi would be seen as perfect to where even if you do trust her entirely, you would still, I think, look at this plan and be like, I don't know about this. Like, but you also have the compelling nature of Boaz's character as well, where it's like he has treated her with hesed love up to this point. Now, there's still a risk, and we can't avoid that. But I mean, it's hard to know that because all she says is, "I'll do all that you say," and you can't read into all of the emotions that she's feeling. But she's certainly still taking a risk. But I think there is trust in all of the parties who are there, where she's thinking it's a risk worth taking.
One more thought. I feel like sometimes the big thing that becomes risk is the fear of pain, and so with like
you said fear of what?
Of pain.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like with not just like the physical risk that's being taken, but the risk of what if my hope is shattered again?
Oh man.
What if I allow myself hope and it's destroyed?
Yeah.
And so you have to trust God more than that kind of fear.
Yeah, that's good.
And more than past experiences too, because we learn that kind of fear through past experiences sometimes.
Yeah.
I just want to get a thought out, but I think as we read through this, the story becomes more beautiful because it is kind of such a balance of like disobedience led to trouble, and the obedience leads to redemption and blessing. It kind of flows in that arc, and we see now Ruth's obedience kicking in.
Yeah.
And I won't ruin the story, but
yeah. Yeah.
Things are gonna probably work out.
Probably. We'll see. That's right. Ben, when you say this, I remember hearing a quote on the radio or maybe it was a podcast that Kayla and I listened to, that it was about a family who was about to take on an endeavor that could have been threatening to their family, but they wanted to trust the Lord in it. And he said that they had to begin to process these types of decisions as not, I'm going to trust that God is going to protect bad things from happening. And instead saying, I trust that God can redeem any bad thing that does happen. And that understanding as we take risk really changes things. It's not a protection from any harm. It is the ability to redeem no matter what harm is done to us. And I think that does like reshape the way that we view risks in our faith. And I think it's pretty powerful. Anything else on this? Because I was just gonna, like, after talking about that and letting you think on it, I wanted you to just, I think, wrestle with where your faith is right now in that regard. Just in, like, does your faith have the capacity to take risks? Is your trust bold enough to take risks? And then where is that line? Where is the point that you would say, I will until then? And so I'm not calling all of us out to we all need to move to different cities and take on difficult things in the name of the Lord. But I am saying we should be evaluating our willingness to take risks on this side of eternity. And that is reflective of our trust in the Lord. So I think Ruth gives us, as we said, just a picture of bold trust that is willing to take risks. Willing to take risks. Anything you want to add on before we move on? Cool. All right, let's see what Ruth does here. Chapter 3, verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. So first, maybe this setting reminds you a little bit of Lot and his daughters that we talked about in Ruth chapter 1, where Lot's daughters said, they scheme up this plan where they say, hey, let's get our dad really drunk. Let him go to bed. We will sleep with them so we can have kids that will continue his line. I want to say that to say this is not the same picture. Okay, this is not the intent here. She is not making a sexual advancement here. She does exactly what Naomi encouraged her to do. So let's continue. Verse 8. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. So her plan works. I assume the cool breeze likely startles him awake. He rolls over and he sees Ruth. So if I'm directing this scene, if this is a scene in a movie, you would be wanting people to feel the tension and pressure that exists here. Because I guarantee Ruth has not slept a wink since she set herself up here. Because in her, you just have to believe that in her mind, she understands how compromising her situation is. You would think that she is wondering how this was going to play out, understanding that it is possible that it could end very bad. What if someone else sees me and it's not Boaz? What if? And so it is in this moment where Boaz wakes up, looks to Ruth, that Ruth is hanging on what word he is going to say. And so he stirs awake. Her heart is beating, and she waits for him to see her. And behold, he sees Ruth at his feet. He's confused. She is anxiously awaiting his response. And then verse 9. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant." And we're about to see Ruth go off script here. So Ruth does not necessarily do what Naomi asks, but takes things into her own hands. She says, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Spread your wings over your servant. And so, first of all, recognize, what did Naomi say Ruth should do? It says, lay down, let him wake up, and then he will tell you what to do. And Ruth says, hey, I'm your servant. Would you spread your wings over me? Now, does this sound familiar? Have we seen this before? So, if you remember back in Ruth chapter 2, when Boaz and Ruth meet, it is in Boaz's field where he sees Ruth and he goes to her and he says to her, look, wait, we have it right here. Ruth chapter 2, verse 12. This is what he says. So he says, look, I know your story. I know that you left your land, followed your mother-in-law to this land and following the one true God. And Ruth 2, verse 12, this is what he says: the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And so we see him saying, look, you have come to find care and safety in the Lord. You have come to the right place. And so some critical interpreters have said that she was asking for a bit of his blanket so it wouldn't be cold in that situation. But I believe that there is something much deeper going on here. I think Ruth is intentionally echoing the prayer of Boaz here. She is saying, Boaz, you prayed that I would find refuge under the wings of our God. Could it be that God would use you to bring me refuge? Could it be that God would use you to protect me, to provide for me? You are a redeemer. Will you redeem me? How beautiful is it? How bold is this? She's saying, Boaz, will you marry me? And so, do you understand, first of all, how backwards this is? Ruth, a Moabite woman, a poor, widowed foreigner, is approaching a wealthy Israelite man and asking him to marry her. In that day, this is when the Hebrew listeners would have covered their eyes and said, what is she thinking? Like, don't do this. It makes you cringe. They're thinking, why would she even ask that? She should know better. This is a bold and risky ask on Ruth's part. But do you know why it's possible? I believe because she knew the character and the heart of Boaz. She knew that this was a safe place to have bold faith because she knew the person that Boaz was. And so remember how she had already experienced this hesed love from Boaz. This love where he was bestowing upon her countless and numerous and abundant blessings, though she was a foreigner. And so what a great picture for us. Where else do we see this theme? This radical, scandalous approachability. A Moabite woman asking for the hand of an Israelite man, like a peasant appealing to a king, or like a sinner approaching a holy God. This is just a subtle reminder of the boldness in which we can approach the throne of grace. You know, as a Moabite woman, what she is asking of Boaz is blasphemy. What she is asking of Boaz is ridiculous. How could she do such a thing? You're not worthy. You can't cross that line. But because of the heart of Boaz, it is a safe place to boldly approach. And so in our sin, we do not safely belong in the presence of God. We can't cross that line. We should not be able to cross that line. But oh, how Jesus has given us access to a well of grace and mercy that we do not deserve, and how Jesus has made it safe for sinners to find rest under his wings. Oh, how Jesus, the glorious Boaz, invites us across our sin, like a foreign woman crossing every cultural line, and he invites us to draw near to him and find new life. This is radical, scandalous approachability. And this is Boaz giving us a glimpse into the work that Christ, I believe, will do for us in the throne room. So, how does he respond? Verse 9. And so as you read this, I want you to key in to, I would say, this captivating example of love that we get. There's a love that exists here between Ruth and Boaz. And what I'm going to do is highlight this example and list it in the form of like a list here that we'll unpack here in a second. So what I'm going to do first is make the list from the text, and then we'll kind of wrestle with it. So how does he respond? Verse 10, and he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter." He continues to use this term, my daughter. "You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." And so how does Boaz respond to this grand proposal? He says, "Ruth, daughter, you continue to amaze me." He says, remember, he had applauded her for her faith because she left her family and began to follow the Lord into this new land. And here he says, you have outdone yourself. You've been now patient. Like you've been willing to not go after other opportunities. I would imagine not that they're numerous, but he still says you have been patient. He says you've not desperately chased after any opportunity, but you have patiently waited. Love is patient. Okay, so that's our first one. Love is patient. Verse 11, they go on. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet, listen to this, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight and in the morning, and if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. Okay, so I want to point out how Boaz handles this situation. He says, my daughter, I will do what you ask. I am happy to do it. But there is a redeemer nearer than me. And so Boaz is bringing up the fact that there is another person in their community, in their clan, who is in closer relationship to Ruth, I guess it would be Naomi, than he is. So he says, hey, I am glad to do it, but we must do it right. They technically have first dibs, is what he's saying. And so what I think we see here is that in an amazing act of honor, he is willing to submit to the order of God's law before acting hastily. And I think we see that he exemplifies that love is pure. It is pure. Now, I think when we hear this, we often silo this application to sexual purity. Like we silo a pure love to think primarily in the realm of sexuality. But here, what's going on here is much deeper than sexual purity, because I do think there is. I mean, Boaz is willing to not read into Ruth's advancement and willing to be patient and wait and to talk to her about the situation. But what we see is purity of heart. We see pure and honorable character, a person who can be trusted, a person who is safe. Boaz exemplifies a love that has a pure motive, one that doesn't insist on its own way, one that is not driven by selfishness. This is a picture of love that puts the needs and desires of another before itself. And so he said this is love being pure. Love is pure. So again, we're just making a list. We're going to unpack this in a second. Now, we also see from that same section, this is cool, that love pays a price. Love pays a price. He says, I'll redeem you. He is willing to make the sacrifice to redeem Ruth, because redeeming her and her land and her family's land will cost Boaz's resources, and Boaz is in for it, though. He says, look, I'll do it. I'll redeem you. Now, I, of course, do not approve arranged marriages, obviously. But the concept of a dowry is powerful. This idea, I don't know if you're familiar with a dowry, but it is a certain payment that is due to the family of the bride, on behalf of the groom. And I guess it would be convenient with me with 4 girls to reinstate the dowry, but the concept of what that communicates, that you are worth my heart and my things. Like I'm willing to give to you to get you. Right? And so obviously that system gets flawed and the beauty really loses its luster whenever it's corrupted. But just that concept, for the sake of illustration, Boaz is showing that his love is willing to pay a price. It is willing to sacrifice. Ruth, I am willing to redeem you. I'm happy to give myself for you. What a picture of love this is. And just a thought on this. I think maybe we need to be reminded here that love does pay a price. That love, biblical, Christ-centered love, sacrifices of itself. And I think that often, and you may find yourself here, that you're in seasons where the demands are high, the price is high, and it is constant, and love, you are constantly pouring yourself out. But I just want to encourage you to take heart that this is godly love. A love that pours out is a countercultural love that Christ has called us to. A love that pays a price, shows that we're willing to die to ourselves for the sake of another. This is love. It pays a price. So the story continues, and we're going to continue to track this example of love. Boaz tells her to lie down till the morning. And then here in verse 14, this is what he says, verse 14. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. So here, Boaz is protecting Ruth's integrity. It was common for prostitutes to come to the threshing floor to all of these men who've been working all day and who are just together without their spouses, because the prostitutes know this is where I can make money. Remember, we are living in the era of the judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so he recognizes, I don't want your reputation to be crushed. Hide yourself. Go out at this time. I don't want somebody to get the wrong idea about you. And so what we see here, I think, is that love protects. Not only is he protecting her physically, but he's protecting her heart. He's protecting her reputation. He cares for her. He's protecting her. So love protects. So at this point, Boaz is just crushing this. He's taking ownership of Ruth. He wants to holistically protect her body, her heart. And I just imagine how this love would have made Ruth feel. Like a love that she likely has not experienced before in a culture where, in the Moabite culture, where sex was that of worship, right? Where your body was worship. Or enjoying your body would be worship, the act of worship. So here we see love protects. Now let's finish up this interaction. Verse 15. And he said, bring the garments you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? And I'm now imagining, talk about someone who probably also did not sleep that night, like Naomi, wondering what happened to Ruth. Then she told her all that the man had done for her, verse 17, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, and listen to this, he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. You can't go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. So I love this. Boaz here shows that love provides. Love provides. Now, he certainly provides resources for her. We see that, and he continues to do it. He continues to give her barley and to go home with it. But I would argue here that this provision is deeper. Let me show you what I mean. Look at the interaction between Ruth and Naomi. Naomi asks how things went. Ruth unpacks it with her, says, hey, this happened, and it went better than I thought it was going to, or whatever, however that interaction went. But then he hands her the barley, and he tells her what Boaz told her. This is what he says. It says, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Now, I am wondering that when Naomi is looking at her hands full of barley, if she is taken back to the moment that she entered back into Bethlehem after 10 years of tragedy, when she says this in Ruth chapter 1, when she says, I went away full and the Lord has brought me back empty. And now she stands here with an arm full of barley, and Boaz saying to her, don't let her arms be empty. Give her something. Let her arms be full. I'm just imagining this is God's way of restoring her and saying, look, you came back. I know you felt empty, but I had a plan to restore you. And so here we see not only does love provide resources, but love provides hope. Love provides truth about the future, that it's good and that we can be trusted. Love provides hope. I think that's a beautiful picture there. And so I think here we get this glimpse of exemplary love in this story. Let me see where that's at, that list. Now, what I'm not going to try to do here is apply these to all of your circumstances, because that's not the goal. But I do know that we are all called to this type of love, because we are all in relationships, and they vary, whether it's parent-child relationships, spouse relationships, coworkers, church family, fill in the blank. We are all in relationships and called to embody this type of love to the people that we do life with. And so instead of trying to draw out applications and say, hey, if you're a parent and you want a patient love, here is how you do it. That's not what I'm interested in. What I want to do is just take a moment, to give us a moment to reflect on this and to consider how these compelling characteristics of love might strike us in this season in certain relationships. Okay? So I'm going to give you some time to think about it. You can journal if you want. But really what I'm asking is, what does Boaz's example of love stir in you? So take a moment, think about that, and then I'll bring us back here in just a second. So I think it's important, anytime you see lists like this, like from the text, that we don't just look at these things and think that, okay, I just need to take these things home, apply them, so that I can have a better life, so that I can treat others better. That's never what we mean by drawing these lists out to show us. One, if that's the case, you'll eventually fail and it'll be discouraging. And two, God wants something much deeper for you than to just try to apply characteristics without understanding first his heart for you. Because I think what we see is that he will never ask us to go and do something he has not already shown to us, something that he has not already applied himself. So you think, God, his love is patient. You think about how long-suffering he is with us as we continue to run back to our sin over and over again, and he restores us. Or think about how his love is pure and how he was willing to leave his throne in glory to come down and to not leverage his power and authority over us, but instead chose to wash our feet. Or you think about how his love protects, and how he protects our heart, and how he guards our salvation, not allowing the enemy to pluck us from his care. Or how he provides hope, and he provides this hope of a future kingdom that we can always look to and always find rest in, even when things are so hard. And man, how his love pays a price, willing to put on flesh, die for us. He gives us this example of love, this picture of love, not to just try to apply, but to come and enjoy, to come and live from, to come and enjoy so that we might live out, not live out so that we might gain access to him. So this is something we need to remember, that anytime we have lists like this, that God first invites us to come and be before he invites us to go and do. Any thoughts on this before we move on? All right, so we're going to wrap up here. See how this chapter closes. This is pretty cool. So I say it's an interesting part of the story. Verse 18, she replied, wait. So Naomi says, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Okay, so this is where the scene would end. The episode would end, and the audience would really be on the edge of their seat, because they recognize the conclusion is soon. It's coming. Naomi says, hey, things are going to be settled today. But there's still this tension now. And I would say that it is a suffocating tension, because there are two paths forward. One with Boaz, a man whose character has been proven. We've seen that Boaz can be trusted. This is a secure future full of love, and hope. But what's the other option? In fact, the person who has first dibs, there's another redeemer, another person who has the opportunity to say yes to Ruth before Boaz gets the opportunity. And so what's the other option? Being given to a man that she doesn't know. One who was living, as we've talked about, in the time of the judges, where everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. So now do you feel the tension as you look at this crossroads? You see, she could end up with someone who might not be willing, might desire to treat her as the foreigner that she is. Or a man who could leverage his power in hurtful and shameful ways over her. Or someone who would see this as an opportunity to get something he wants in a foreign woman who really has no rights. So you see how this tension is now here. This new man is in, and their future could go one of two ways. One is of hope, and one is even worse because it is the picture of hope destroyed. It is the picture where things could be good and hopeful, but it has been crushed. And so what happens next? A future of hope or not? Will God take them from despair to delight? We'll find out next on Ruth chapter 4.